Hello, Reading Room. We are here on day 3 of our new book, so it's not brand new. We started our A Dangerous Idea, the Scopes trial, the original fight over science in schools. And we have a new thumbnail here. That's not it. Yeah, I'm not going to worry about it right now, but I do think I know where that came from. Oh, no, hold on just a minute. Watch it change before your very eyes. Bam! Oh. There we go. Will you get a reading? Yeah, I should. We're on chapter 5 of our book, A Dangerous Mind by Debbie Levy. Whatever degrades another degrades me. You know, isn't that just like, to me, Jesus' statement, whatever you do to your brother, you do to me? While young Will Bryan was working on his passion for stirring speech making, young Clarence Darrow was working on his passion too. He was working on his running, throwing, and hitting. As a boy in elementary school in Kinsman, Ohio, a teenager at the Kinsman Academy, and at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, Clarence later wrote, "Never has life held for me anything quite so entrancing as baseball." That's disappointing. And while Will read and reread the Bible stories, Clarence's holy book was more along the lines of The Story of a Bad Boy, a novel by Thomas Bailey Aldrich. Not that Clarence was a bad boy. He just wasn't notably good. There was a lot about school that he didn't like. He hated taking Latin classes and Greek. He hated the study of history, just a bunch of names and dates to remember. He hated learning grammar, geometry too. And yet for all the distaste he voiced about school, Clarence learned. He learned the subjects that he said he hated. He learned at home too, where history wasn't about names and dates, but tales of bold people who stood up for justice, like his middle name namesake, William Seward. He absorbed grammar through the books the family read aloud around the dining table. He was drawn to scientific topics like zoology and geology. His father encouraged him to question the ideas that others held dear. My instinct, Clarence later wrote, was no doubt the majority view. While Clarence didn't set out to be an orator, unlike a certain boy who lived over in Salem, Illinois, he was drawn to speech making and debate. That's William Jennings Bryan. Clarence couldn't help noticing that the best orators, at least in his view, were lawyers. On public holidays and political rallies, at political rallies, lawyers came to Kinsman from nearby towns to entertain and educate local audiences. Across the street from the Darrows' octagonal-shaped house was the tin shop. The tinner also served as Kinsman's justice of the peace, an official who heard minor disputes. Clarence liked the sharp exchanges between lawyers. I enjoyed the way pettifoggers abused each other. Clarence soon joined in his small town's declamation contest. His specialty was taking the unpopular view of the issues of the day and somehow winning the contest even while promoting ideas that most people rejected. After Kinsman Academy, Clarence completed a year of prep school at Allegheny College. The Darrows didn't have money for him to continue. Perhaps it was just as well, as he didn't seem to place much more value on his college coursework than on his elementary school classes. I came back a better ball player for my higher education, Clarence wrote. I abandoned further school life and began my education. Back in Kinsman, Clarence became a teacher in one of the country schools outside of town. The students hadn't had an instructor quite like him before. He told them he would not hit them, breaking with the widespread tradition of corporal punishment in schools. He expanded both lunchtime and recess time. Why not? They'd been his favorite parts of the school day. They still were. It seemed Clarence played games, especially baseball, right along with the students. But Clarence knew he couldn't earn a living by playing games forever. He wanted to make more money. And he continued to think about the pettifoggers, those lawyers who talked circles around one another before the justice of the peace. A good lawyer, he figured, could spend his days arguing and get paid good money for it. So Clarence started reading law books when he was done teaching for the day. And when he was 20 years old, he quit his teaching job to attend law school at University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. He did not distinguish himself there and gave it up after a year. A law degree, though, wasn't the only way to become a lawyer in those days. Clarence apprenticed with a law firm in Youngstown, Ohio, for a year. He passed the exam to become a full-fledged lawyer, came back to Kinsman, and married his sweetheart, Jessie Owell. They lived above a store in tiny Andover, Ohio, not far from their hometown. Not many law clients came to Clarence at first. The business he did get was largely bill collections work, echoing the experience of that other young lawyer whom Clarence hadn't yet met, but again mirroring Will Bryan's experience. As a spanking new lawyer, Clarence received speaking invitations. He appeared at the usual patriotic gathering, public holidays, and small-town picnics. He wasn't orating about much of substance yet, but in a Memorial Day speech in 1886, he did venture a rather extreme idea that women should be allowed to vote in elections. But he wasn't yet one of those nimbly argumentative lawyers he'd admired in the tinsmith courtroom. Clarence was always reading something. By his late 20s, he was devouring books that deeply affected him and his political ideas. His reading and observations confirmed many of the values he was raised with. He became appalled at the inequality in American society and the ever-increasing concentrations of wealth among the privileged few. He was disgusted at the dreadful working conditions of so many laborers, including children. People became criminals, Clarence concluded, largely because of their social conditions, not because they were intentionally evil. He became more and more open about his agnosticism, his questioning, if not disbelief, of the existence of God. Clarence drew inspiration not only from books of political philosophy and economy, but also from works of literature. Walt Whitman was a favorite author. Each of us limitless, each of us with his or her right upon the earth, the poet wrote. Whatever degrades another degrades me. Before long, Clarence was writing essays and lecturing on Whitman and on the poet's relevance in the everyday world. It is a sad mistake to believe that injustice and wrong can injure only the poor and the weak. Clarence wrote, taking Whitman's observations as his credo. Every mean word and narrow thought and selfish act degrades the aggressor, leaves its mark upon his soul and its penalty in his life. I fully agree. Injustice damaged not only its victims, but also society as a whole, and even the oppressor themselves. This conviction would shape Clarence's life and work. To fire up his law career, Clarence moved with Jessie and their baby boy to the larger Ohio town of Ashtabula. He attracted more interesting cases, leaving the collection's work behind. 3 years after that, restless for more, Clarence moved his family to the big city, Chicago. It was 1887. Clarence was 30 years old, and it was in the Windy City that his career and reputation took flight. Clarence joined all kinds of clubs in Chicago: the Land and Labor Club, the Personal Rights League, the Secular Union, which gave him all kinds of opportunities to hone his oratory. The Secular Union, a gathering of free thinkers who wanted to keep religion out of public life, offered Clarence a forum in which to develop his ideas. At an Easter gathering of this group, Clarence gave a talk with a theme that definitely would not have worked in a more typical Easter celebration. The religion for which we are struggling and which must prevail in the future is not based upon a supreme being, he said. Rather, the religion that was meaningful to Clarence and his like-minded friends was based on a foundation deep in human reason. Despite being named for one of the founders of the Republican Party, William Seward, Clarence became active in the Democratic Party. Clarence's political views didn't neatly line up with the Democrats' positions. He rejected, for example, the Southern Democrats' politics of white supremacy. Not only did he favor political rights for African Americans, he believed in and practiced social equality as well. Unlike most white people, whatever their political affiliation, whether Southerners or Northerners, Clarence socialized with African Americans. He promoted black resistance to white supremacy. For that matter, he embodied white resistance to white supremacy. Now and then, he said in a speech before the Men's Club in Chicago, we find some statesman who proposes to solve the Negro question by wishing to send them off to themselves somewhere, as if the Lord made one country for white people and another for black people, and he forgot to sort them out. And if we should do the sorting, and as if we should do the sorting. But the South does not propose to send the Negroes away, for if they sent the Negroes away, they would be obliged to work for themselves. And here is a picture of Clarence Darrow. So I'll read what that up now. But compared to the Republican Party's consistent support for big business interests, the Democratic Party's concern for the laboring classes aligned with Clarence's views. He was not comfortable in the more radical wing of the democracy, eventually embracing the views that only drastic changes in the economic system could make a difference in the lives of workers. Campaigning for Democratic candidates, Clarence became a familiar headliner, appreciated for his sense of humor. The people who heard Clarence Darrow of Chicago at the Opera House last Saturday night will be pleased to know that he is billed for another address on the evening of November 7th, announced the Decatur, Illinois Daily Review in late October 1892. He is one of the brightest men in the state, and it is a treat to hear him. He will have one of the biggest audiences of the campaign. As his reputation in politics expanded, so did Clarence's law practice. Clients came to him with cases that drew public attention, and he took those that raised issues he was passionate about. One of these issues was the inhumanity and fecklessness of the death penalty. In 1894, a mentally ill young man named Patrick Eugene Pendergast was convicted and sentenced to hang for the murder of the mayor of Chicago. After the conviction, Clarence represented Pendergast in a special trial conducted to review his death sentence. Clarence had worked for the slain mayor earlier in his career and deeply mourned his death. But for Clarence, the taking of a life for a life was a travesty that outweighed his personal feelings, especially when the murderer suffered from mental illness. Here is Prendergast. He pleaded with the jury, the product of the infinite God, not of his own making. I beseech you, gentlemen, there were no women on juries in 1894. Do not visit upon this poor boy the affliction which God Almighty placed upon him for some inscrutable reason unknown to us. It wasn't God, Clarence Darrow. Pay attention. That's the thing that pisses me off about that kind of warped thinking. It wasn't God. That was man who perverted the situation. Where was he? From the tenements? He concluded, Darrow, this poor weak mishap vessel I place in your protection in your hands. I beg of you, gentlemen, take it gently, tenderly, carefully. I do not beseech you, do not break the clay, for though weak and cracked and useless, it is the handiwork of the infinite God. Fuck you, Darrow. Clarence, the agnostic, invoking God. This was the first big closing argument, and maybe he thought it was his best approach. As a non-believer, he was the minority. He was arguing for a man's life and needed to speak to the jury in terms of its members would understand. His argument did move the jurors. It brought tears to the eyes of some, but they still sentenced Prendergast to hang. So nice job. Yeah, they don't want that kind of degenerate next to them. Pay attention, Darrow. In the career that lay, and you know, by the way, what he is perpetuating is the fear of right-wing fascists, which is that all that they are is a drain on the system. They create the drain, they create the science that proves the drain, and then they drain. And then what he said, drain the swamp. What do you think that means? In the career that lay ahead of him, of the 102 cases in which Clarence fought against a sentence of capital punishment, the Prendergast case was the only one in which his client was put to death. Did you stick with that argument, Darrow? Clarence was equally passionate about the rights of workers to join labor unions. Yeah, no thanks, Darrow. And strike against big business for better pay and working conditions. In his first case representing the interests of the working class, he defended Eugene V. Debs, the famous union leader and political activist. Let's find out what happened to Debs. Let's find out what happened to those union workers where Debs was from. Debs also went on to run for president 5 times. The legal proceedings against Debs centered on his activities during a combative strike and boycott in 1894 against the company that made Pullman Railroad cars. Yeah, they're on my list of labor union disputes, so let's see. As Clarence saw it, the prosecution of Debs was a case of the government doing a bidding of powerful business interests. Clarence achieved only a partial victory for Debs, but his advocacy for workers' rights drew attention from Democratic politicians. So by 1896, Clarence was a well-known courtroom litigator, a favorite speechmaker, and a political activist, and that was why he attended the Democratic National Convention at the Chicago Coliseum on July 9th of that year, when Will Bryan stunned and excited the 20,000 attendees with his Cross of Gold speech. There, the two orators from America's heartland met for the first time. During the speech, Clarence sat with his good friend and mentor, John Altgeld. Altgeld, who was governor of Illinois, did not applaud. He did not cheer. Clarence thought he looked sad. The next day, after Will clinched the nomination to run as the Democratic candidate for president, Altgeld and Clarence were talking about what happened. It takes more than speeches to win real victories, Altgeld warned. Applause lasts but a little while. Altgeld continued, I have been thinking over Bryan's speech. What did he say anyhow? After the convention, Clarence became the Democratic candidate for the U.S. House of Representatives from Illinois' 3rd Congressional District. He also campaigned for Will. Like Will, Clarence believed that the government should rein in capitalists who only chased profits, never considering the well-being of employees or communities. He favored limiting the workday to 8 hours to protect workers. He opposed high tariffs and advocated a silver-backed money supply as beneficial to farmers and debtors. But on Election Day, November 3rd, Will lost the presidency to Republican Party candidate William McKinley. Clarence lost his congressional race to his Republican opponent. Governor Altgeld lost his gubernatorial race. Clarence kept turning over Altgeld's comments in his mind. What did he say anyhow? So many words, so little meaning, so much religion, so little reason. Clarence saw Will as a big talker but not a thinker, as hollow Will hadn't read widely enough. What did he know of science, literature, philosophy? He found all his answers in the Bible. He should not be a political leader. He enthralled audiences, but he didn't educate them. A few months after the election, Clarence and Will were together at a Democratic Party gathering. You'd better study science, history, philosophy, and quit this village religious stuff, Clarence said. You're head of the party before you are ready, and a leader should lead with your head of the party before you are ready, and a leader should lead with thought. Darrow's the only man in the world who looks down on me for believing in God, Will commented to others gathered around. The quarrel between Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan had begun. It would simmer, grow, and make headlines, entertain, and explode, ending only when one of them lay down for afternoon nap in a guest house in Dayton, Tennessee, 28 years later. Chapter 6, Two Tall Men Talking. This is William Jennings Bryan outside the office of his newspaper, The Commoner, in 1905. That's a great picture. That is a great picture of, what do you call it? History, but that's not the word I'm talking about. Posterity, that's the word. Unlike Clarence Darrow, the Democratic Party did not give up on Will. In 1900 and again in 1908, he won the party's nomination for president. Both times, too, he lost the elections. It wasn't for want of talking. Will was the first presidential candidate to take his case directly to voters. Candidates before him had others speak for them. Campaigning was viewed as beneath the dignity of a future president. And, oh, by the way, when you're spending all your time campaigning, maybe you have other things that you should be doing for the country. For his identification with ordinary citizens, Will became known as the Great Commoner. It was a moniker that stayed with him for the rest of his life. In 1901, after his second presidential loss, Will founded the newspaper he called The Commoner, and it was all about publishing the thoughts of William Jennings Bryan. While Will evoked mockery for some of his emotional style and his appeals to Christian morals, he attracted the love and admiration of millions of Americans. See, that's what really, seriously, I'm criticized and mocked for my emotional style for sure. And I mocked for my Christian appeals to morality for sure. William rode the rails for 3 months, reaching 26 of 45 states and speaking in person to some 5 million people. During that presidential run, girls joined Bryan's club and complained that they could not have voted for Will even if they'd been adults. Oh, because the women didn't have the right to vote. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution giving women the right to vote wasn't adopted until 1920. In a school in New Jersey, all the third graders informally adopted Bryan as their middle name. So did their teachers. Parents named their children Bryan, who could not get to a Bryan speech, no problem. Thanks to the recent invention of the record player, Bryan speaks rain or shine, announced an advertisement in a Nebraska newspaper in 1908. Have you heard him speak? You can if you will come to our store. He is speaking here every day on the genuine Edison phonograph. Today he speaks on an ideal republic, the tariffs question, the railroad question, swollen fortunes, and 6 other favorite subjects. Wow. He really was a speaker, wasn't he? You get the full effects of his sonorous voice and his beautiful tricks of voice and manner, the ad continued. It is also so natural and lifelike, you are apt to find yourself applauding the speaker. Will's speaking career only expanded after his election losses. So did his braiding together of religion and politics. He wrote and spoke, preached really, about the Christian duty to do good in both private and public life. This was a distillation of the social gospel movement, which had been developing since the late 1800s as a reaction against the unbridled capitalism and materialism of the era Mark Twain dubbed the Gilded Age. And no wonder I'm speaking out against the Gilded Age because I'm speaking about it in Bookless Classroom. And no wonder I'm for Will. Sorry about that. I did a mold thing, and I do think that is mold. Again, for Will, applying Christian morals to politics and government excluded Black Americans, but I also think it's reactions to that in Vega that they injected in me from McLaren. And government excluded Black Americans. Will seemed indifferent to racism and the rise of Jim Crow laws in the South, which oppressed African Americans and denied them voting rights. This was in spite of the explicit guarantee of Black voting rights in the 15th Amendment added to the U.S. Constitution in 1870 when Will was 10 years old. In an article headlined Mr. Bryan on the South, the commenter explained, Mr. Bryan's views on Southern race problems are sane. His feeling for the Negro is kind. His interest in the white comes first. The editors of the Appeal, an African-American-owned newspaper, countered, one of the most stupendous frauds of the present day is the so-called political reformer, among whom we have no hesitation in including the much lauded William Jennings Bryan. Mr. Bryan is a mixture of bigotry and bumptiousness. Again, appealing to the interests of the white first only means that you are going to have a voice for the underprivileged. It doesn't mean pocketing money. He's not getting rich on his politics, it doesn't seem. He's not speaking on a university circuit where that's where he's getting paid. It seems to me he's sort of volunteering. To inform, and his speeches are honest and stable. He is not, I hate that look. He's not vacillating on his values. In 1912, Woodrow Wilson, big-jawed guy, right? An overt racist and lukewarm adherent of the social gospel movement was elected president. The new president tapped Will as a Secretary of State in charge of the nation's foreign policy. See, and he sat out of World War I until he knew the victory. If you ask me, if he was a racist, he wanted the victory to be on German side, so he waited to see, and when it didn't, he came in as if he saved the day, which he did because they actually were building that kind of artillery in science. They were just going to use it in the other direction. So if they used it in the one direction, he became a hero. The new president tapped Will as a Secretary of State in charge of the nation's foreign policy. In Europe, war broke out in August 1914, a ruinous conflict that ultimately ensnared more than 30 nations. Wilson and many Americans sided with the Allies, which included Great Britain, France, and Russia. Yeah, he sided with the Allies after he waited 3 years against the great powers, which included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Will, unlike his commander-in-chief, strongly opposed American involvement in this or any foreign war. And in 1915, he resigned as Secretary of State rather than remain part of an administration that joined the conflict later known as World War I. So that's a man who stands by his principles. You might not like him, make fun of him, don't vote for him, fix an election because you hate him. He's a man who stood by his principles. And I'm sorry, but when you've got oh, that's from his own commoner. His interest in the whites come first. The editors of The Appeal, an African-American owned newspaper, countered. Yeah. It really makes you wonder what was in the interest of those editors of that newspaper. It may be their own self-interest in that whenever they see a white person espousing something, they equate it with bigotry, and that is the sort of what is it? The problem with association, right? Without knowing the individual. But you know, there are people who espouse, I will never trust a white person, right? So that can be expanded to, I will never trust a person who has had white privilege. Back he went on the lecture circuit. He took up new causes. Will favored prohibition, a national ban on alcoholic beverages, and worked for the adoption of the 18th Amendment, which in 1919 made prohibition the law of the land. He supported women's right to vote, secured the 19th Amendment in the 1920s. He continued to advocate for decent working conditions, wages, and respect for laborers. He must have been a woman's delight. I have got to say, this guy has got to be like just completely a woman's man. Yeah. All standing up for all those rights. And the prohibition and like kind of getting it. It's like our morals are, I get that we don't want we can't go back to prohibition because we gave people so many reasons to drink alcohol. And when you read that book, How the Other Half Lives, and you look at the tenements there and the Irishmen in those tenements, they were really there as the middlemen to supply the answer to your problems. And cha-ching, cha-ching, as the system demanded. It's just the question of, were you a William Jennings Bryan? Where you still stood by your scruples? That's the question, isn't it? How is it that you don't stand by your scruples? It could be the example of the Englishman. But the Englishman could have got fed up with you because you never stand by your scruples. I don't know. He continued to advocate for decent working conditions, wages, and respect for laborers. He spoke passionately, personally about his Christianity, and it was this fervent religiosity that brought Will to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, or at least to Will's version of Darwin's theory. Here he is, melodious and gently humorous under a big tent, bursting with admirers, or inside a packed auditorium. I am not yet convinced that man is a lineal descendant of the lower animals. I do not mean to find fault with you if you want to accept the theory. All I mean to say is that while you may trace your ancestry back to the monkey, if you find pleasure or pride in doing so, you shall not connect me with your family tree without more evidence than has yet been produced. I swear to gosh, I've said it. Will, I don't know if I was quoting you, or you're quoting me, if I don't know how this repeat thing works, but you and I, we're on the same plane. Of course, Darwin's theory does not say that humans trace their ancestry back to the monkey, but Will is setting up a classic straw man argument, distorting the actual meaning of the thing he doesn't like into something extreme or ridiculous, and arguing against this distortion rather than against the reality of the thing. Humanity's supposed monkey ancestor is an easy target, much easier than Darwin's more complex theory of descendant with modification, because that's what Darwin's theory was perverted into. It was absolutely perverted. So he is not arguing Darwin's theory. He is arguing the perversion of Darwin's theory, the ridiculousness of what scientists have done in order to avoid the common sense theory of there's a God as a creator, much easier to understand, especially with our spiritual drive for something higher. And Jennings knew where the ridiculousness of the argument stood. Will isn't out for scientific accuracy. He is out to confirm the divinity of Jesus Christ and the presence of God and miracles in the work. Science does not confirm miracles. I don't think that's what he's out to do. Not by his works and deeds. Not by his works and deeds. It sounds like to me he's out to get away with, to do away with prohibition, to make sure that women can vote, to make sure that he is staying fervently accountable for his religious beliefs. That's what it sounds like to me. Further, Will explains, because Darwin and other scientists cannot with certainty pinpoint the moment life began, the whole theory is unconvincing, and certainly not more convincing than the story of divine creation. But there is another objection, Will continues. Now this is just sort of like the ridiculousness of trying to make Will Jennings Bryan into a narrow thinker. So, because this is his thinking. And by the way, he didn't close the door on Darwinian theory at all, or evolution. He just pointed out some of the problems with what a normal person will conclude based on your perversions of the theory. The perversion of the theory is that, yes, when you show that little succession, what you're doing is saying people who look more like a monkey are less evolved. It's in the white supremacist dictator book, Guide to Dictation. Further, Will explains, because Darwin and other scientists cannot... here we go. Will continues. The Darwinian theory represents man as reaching his present perfection by the operation of the law of hate, the merciless law by which the strong crowd out and kill off the weak. See how the other half lives, the tenements in New York City. I prefer to believe that love rather than hatred is the law of development. If you know anything about the idea of merciless nature, a merciless nature, then what Will is saying is true. And that's why we don't believe in a merciless nature. Who's we, Dr. Feravich? See previous reading rooms. This is Will at his most willful. He really does believe in the power of love. He really does believe that through love and the love of God, humanity can progress. And he demonstrates in his behavior support of those beliefs. I don't think you can get a more credible human being than somebody who does that. That's the acid from the coffee, just letting you know. But the theory of evolution is not about hate or about killing off the weak. Will has set up another straw man to knock down. because you need to. Those are the basic mantras. Make America great again. Down with deregulation, right? Down with socialism. That's why you have to speak to those mantras. The speech is long, 45 pages. And by the way, that is speaking to the details, not just mantras, 45 pages. It is rambling, yet also riveting. Will knows how to hold an audience. He pokes fun at science. Unless you can explain a watermelon, do not be too sure that you can set limits to the power of the Almighty. He dismisses the importance of scientific knowledge. Water has been used from the birth of man. We learned after it that it has been used for ages, that it is merely a mixture of gases. But it was far more important that we have water to drink than that we know that it is not water. No kidding. Bravo for that statement. What did science bring us by knowing that it's a mixture of gases? What did you bring us? A big fucking fart. Will gave this speech titled "The Prince of Peace," which you can hear, three things before this. I have to have that one in this one as well. So we got the Prince of Peace here as well. In this playlist is what I'm saying. Look at the previous playlist. We have the Prince of Peace is what we read before we started this new one, but actually it should be in the new one. I'm not sure. Will gave this speech titled "The Prince of Peace" over and over again, over and over and over again. Audiences could not get enough of it. This is the address for which there is the most demand on the Chautauqua circuit, and it is the one which obtained for him his reputation as lecturer. Read the supersized headline at the top of the New York Times spread that published the lecture in full. Will traveled the country as part of the Chautauqua circuit, hugely popular gatherings, often taking place under large tents in which crowds enjoyed entertainers, musicians, singers, and orators. This sounds to me like underground Native American festivities, ceremonies, where they are welcoming Will Bryan Jennings, a different conduit, which they understand that this African paper did not understand, that you better speak the whites' language. Come here, Will Jennings Bryan, come over here, because you understand the Great Spirit in a different way, and you stand by your values. We don't speak the white man's language, but we want you to impress upon our native tribes. We want you to speak a spiritual language that they can understand and then associate with the white man so that they can get through to the white man, with Jennings being the conduit. Oh, just good stuff. So clearly, the Chautauqua circuit, that is a native circuit. What the hell are you talking about? That's not the William McKinley, white man over here, Republican Democratic circuit at all. Will was one of the top draws, up there with Helen Keller, interpreted by Anne Sullivan, Alexander Graham Bell, and Eugene Debs. According to some estimates, Will's ticket sales were exceeded only by Helen Keller's. There was another top draw at Chautauqua events. He too advocated for the underdog, the laborers, the have-nots, against the bankers, railroad magnates, the corporate titans. But he did not speak of miracles or Jesus Christ or the duties of a Christian. Of course, it was Clarence Darrow. After he lost his congressional race in 1896, Clarence focused on his law career, while Will was sermonizing about the rights of laboring classes and underprivileged. Clarence was going to court to defend those rights. He represented labor unionists and accused murderers and alleged conspirators. He represented women who dared to publish sex education materials. As a courtroom lawyer and orator, Clarence didn't put on airs. If you were his witness in a trial or his audience in an auditorium, he was likely to start out talking in a conversational tone as if the two of you were the only ones in the room. His language was unaffected yet also intellectual. He might appeal to your sense of humor or empathy. He might openly cry. You probably would too. So again, describing me as well, right? Both of them, I think, describing me, where you can have strong spiritual opinions and be guided by your spiritual guidance, what guides you spiritually, and still be able to scientifically advocate for those things that are most important. Showing both behaviors is what I'm saying. Will in sermonizing, Clarence in advocating as a lawyer. A typical Darrow client was the union man on trial for criminal conduct while striking against a woodworking mill in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. His provocative metaphor, Clarence reminded the jury of the factory rules that led his client and other workers to strike. The poor devil who works there for $6 or $7 a week cannot speak loud except in case of fire, and he cannot go out excepting he raise his hand like a little boy in school, and he cannot speak to his neighbor because it hinders him in his work. When the poor slaves go in there at 6:45 in the morning, they lock the door to keep them there. And when the whistle sounds at 12, they send their guards around to unlock the doors. And this is how the fires kill so many, right? In the tenements, security, limited space, problematic. Here, you've got the working conditions that laborers had to fight for, in particular the child labor laws, right? And when 1 o'clock comes again, this high priest of the jailers sends his turnkey back to lock up his American citizens once more so that they cannot leave the mill until nighttime comes. So all of those catchphrases, locking up these poor slaves, right? Until the whistle sounds, they unlock the doors. The high priest of jailers sends his turnkey back to lock American citizens up once more. This is really not a criminal case, Clarence said. It is but an episode in the great battle for human liberty. He explained that when the union asked the orator of the mill to negotiate, the owner refused. There would be no bargaining between equal human beings. No, Clarence recounted. Rather, he desired that these poor slaves should come to him and beg him as individuals, as Oliver Twist in the almshouse held out his soup bowl. Clarence's argument went on for 8 hours. He spoke without notes. It took the jury less than an hour to find his client not guilty. As his reputation grew, people crowded courthouse doors for a chance to see the great Darrow, to learn to laugh. What they saw was a tail man, rangy, with big shoulders. His suits were generally shabby. Threads might hang from his shirts. That was my skirt the other day. From his shirts. Did I say skirts? His fingernails may not be as clean as they could be. A lock of his hair insisted on falling on over his forehead, no matter how he wet it down. He didn't usually stand up as straight as he could, and he slouched in his chair as if to not call attention to himself, although by his very lack of posture, he was calling attention to himself. In 1903, Clarence represented coal miners on strike from the anthracite mines of Pennsylvania, one of the most significant labor disputes in U.S. history. Again, he delivered his closing argument over the course of 8 hours. Now, see what's coming here? to the court. He's defending the little guy, but why isn't somebody prosecuting the big guy for these atrocities, right? So you got to just kind of look at this from all sides. Why did I have this up here? As usual, he spoke without notes. They have come in here with broken arms and disfigured faces and broken legs and with one eye and with no eyes. Well, I guess that's the reason why he's defending them, isn't he? Isn't it? He said, if the civilization in this country rests upon the necessity of leaving these starvation wages to these miners and laborers, or upon the labor of these poor little boys from 12 to 14 years of age who are picking their way through the dirt, clouds, and dust of the anthracite coal, then the sooner we are done with this civilization and start over anew, the better. Don't think this wasn't happening in Ohio at one of the big three companies with burning of rubber later on in the 1970s, where workers had to inhale that burning of rubber, but also in 1990s, 2000, where a communist owner took over one of the big three's factories where they made windshields. So you can look it up in a documentary. They're in Ohio, at an Ohio plant, took it over by the Communist Party, which again doesn't necessarily mean community now, does it? Nor does it mean the Native American way of community either. So watch your words and watch your beliefs. They took over, they were there for control and dominance, and they had people without work gloves picking through broken glass in order to find, I don't know what they were finding. They were separating pieces of broken glass without the equipment on their knees, piles of it. So this is from a big three company that had their monopoly broken up and forced them to use parts from a communist-owned company. So this is where you really get in our big, in our Bookless Classroom, where you are really getting these big ideas about what community should mean and what it actually means when it's taken over by a perverted sense of whatever it is, a perverted sense of justice, a perverted sense of Darwinian theory, a perverted sense of what public school systems are supposed to be about, a perverted sense of science, right? After he concluded, the hundreds of spectators burst into applause. The miners won a significant increase in pay, an 8-hour workday, and measures to prevent the exploitation of child labor. Clarence had become the most famous lawyer in the United States. Newspapers called him the Great Defender. A decade later, he stopped taking labor union cases after he was charged with and acquitted of bribing a juror in a notorious case involving a union in Los Angeles. He focused on criminal cases representing all manner of accused murderers and felons. Clarence was more interested in the conditions that could lead a person to crime than in the labels good and evil, which brings in science then. That brings in the science and the perversion of Darrow's theories into not being necessarily for humanity, but upholding scientific thought. The man who owns a sweatshop or a department store may not be to blame himself for the condition of his girls, but when he pays them $5, $3, and $2 a week, I wonder where he thinks they will get the rest of their money to live. Now, this was an exact speech that was also said in front of the justices regarding wages for, and this was recently in the economic fall of 2008, regarding the wages of a bank teller. And the question that was posed, I think by AOC, was, and where do you expect that person to get the rest of their money from? And basically the owner of, it was a real estate company, likely banker who was like giving loans out, whatever. So again, this whole scheme of things. basically said, that's not my problem, was his basic answer. All I can do is the banking on this and the interest on this. That's not my problem. So it's not my problem I create a woman having to work 2 jobs and not be with her children, which may be the reason why it took 2 days for them to find the parents of the child of the logger, and why it's not documented. This is Bookless Classroom. And why it's not documented, because where were those parents? They were forced to be working in that sweatshop. And then they're like, oh, well, you didn't have to work that much. Were you working your fingers to the bone? Well, if I wasn't effing working my fingers to the bone, where would my kids be? I'd be out there underneath your cops' noses looking for trouble. They would be looking for trouble with me. I wonder where he thinks they will get the rest of their money to live, he said in a talk before the prisoners of the Chicago jail in 1902. The only way to cure these conditions is by equality. In his talks on the Shattuck circuit, while Will Bryan was preaching the Prince of Peace, and again, it does get a little extreme, Will Bryan, because you are beginning to raise yourself to an elevation of this kind of godly, when you're the cross of gold, you're hanging yourself on the cross or looking like that. You are. Oh, when I did that in front of my class, when it was like, oh, I did that, because they were like basically hanging me. I was doing everything I could like this, and they were like crucifying me as if I were the harlot. And that's what I did that. And they were like, ah, heresy. No, it wasn't. Stop crucifying me. Maybe that's what William Jennings Bryan was doing. Stop crucifying me. While Will Bryan was preaching the Prince of Peace, Clarence was lecturing on the Russian writer and philosopher Leo Tolstoy. This may not sound like a big crowd pleaser, but on his topic, he was in fact considered a great attraction. As Kansas newspaper put it in 1905, he was the gushing headline proclaimed a giant in height with an eloquence unsurpassed. So there they were, 2 tall men, wowing audiences across the country. Will began his campaign against the theory of evolution. Clarence became a close observer, he wrote, of Mr. Bryan's campaign against knowledge. Mr. Bryan would not have characterized his campaign that way, but he may not have minded the attention. Exactly. Campaign against knowledge? No, it wasn't. Another perversion of words over there. And it seems like you're doing the job of perverting a lot of things in order to assert your position, which begs the question, do you have integrity in your mission? But again, he's getting attention. So here, what's Clarence Darrow writing on? Pessimism. I'm pretty sure when I started my career, I read that. I'm pretty sure I read it, and it was probably the reason why I decided to go into optimism and be an expert in positive psychology on optimism and what creates helplessness. Don't think I'm not an expert, that I don't see the real motherfucking scientists and what they're doing behind all of this ploy. Believe me, I am the expert on creating helplessness and hopelessness, and I am in the lane of creating the opposite, hopefulness and diligence. All of those characteristics, not perverting any one of them at all, and demonstrating our physical need for that kind of lifestyle. This is Dr. Annette Feravich, so there you got the picture, hopefully. This is Pessimism by Clarence Darrow, Rationalist Education Society. So again, perverting this idea of rationalism. I was like, I'm a rationalist, but stop perverting my idea. Like I have to be this kind of atheist looking at water as being gases instead of water as water. You want to say it's not water, it's gases? Go right ahead. You want to say I came from a monkey? Go right ahead. But I have every right in this country to think quite a bit differently than your scientific bullshit that you did not use the scientific method to get to, motherfucking pharmacist. Next chapter, chapter 7, Proofs and Perversions. I don't think I read this one. Maybe I did. I might have gotten to chapter 8. I'm not sure where I got to. So all I'm saying is I'm starting to get to some new information for me too. This is Dr. Annette Feravich with another week of our 3 days on. I do. By the time I'm done with Thursday, I'm just like, oh, too bad. But by the time I start Thursday, I'm like, ugh, this is kind of exhausting. This is Dr. Annette Feravich hoping that I have little soldiers out there all over the place. Real little soldiers that we really are teaching our children to be really something else for this country. To be real leaders in a way that we don't take up arms. We take up hearts and minds is what we do. That's why we call it Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. Thanks for joining me here in the classroom on day 218. This was July 10th. I will see you back here on Tuesday unless I have my girl taking over for me. I don't know what we're doing here. I do clearly know what I'm doing here. I don't know what we're all doing here, but I clearly know what I'm doing here. I keep it working. Thanks for joining me.